Hello everyone, I'm Alvin. Welcome to a new episode of this month's night sky. It's July 2020, and I would like to share you my 5 favorite things to view in the night sky this month. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Number 1 are the gas giants Jupiter and Saturn. So this is what the view will look like of the moon and the giant gas planets on the evening of July 4th, about 10 p.m. This is the view of the naked eye, of course, but if you want to go ahead and get closer, you'll need at least a pair of binoculars and, even better, a telescope. I went ahead and set up the view, a simulated view of my pair of binoculars and my telescope, so you guys can get to see what that may look like. So I'll go ahead and do that and start with Jupiter. So with Jupiter, this is the view of what my pair of 10 by 50 binoculars may look like. So your view may be different depending on the size of your pair of binoculars. A smaller one will have obviously a zoomed out view, and a larger one with greater magnification will have an even closer view. But for my pair of 10 by 50 binoculars, you can see the planet Jupiter. It's a very bright ball. It is the largest planet in the solar system. And then you'll notice these dots surrounding it in a nice line. And these are actually Jupiter's largest moons, the Galilean moons, named after the astronomer Galileo. If you want to get closer, you'll definitely need a telescope. So I'm going to go ahead and simulate what the views of my telescope may look like when it looks at Jupiter on the evening of July 4th. All right, so now you see the planet Jupiter. And you can, if you do look at this under a telescope, you'll notice 2 brown cloud bands on the planet. And now you get to see a little bit more clearly the Galilean moons of Jupiter. Now let's go ahead and view my favorite planet in the solar system, which is Saturn. Now, to the naked eye, Saturn will look like a small, bright orange dot in the sky. It's definitely dimmer than Jupiter, and that's because the planet is even further away from us. So if you have a pair of binoculars, you can actually get a little bit closer. And as you can see, you may be expecting to see Saturn's rings here, but you can barely make them out under this magnification. If you have larger binoculars, something that's more than 10 times magnification, you may be able to spot the rings of Saturn. However, I do recommend seeing this planet under a telescope. It is just a remarkable sight. The first time you see Saturn under a telescope, you'll be astonished because you will definitely know, because of its rings, that it is an object from outer space. That's something that's not of this world. So I definitely recommend this. If you haven't seen Saturn yet, you definitely need to make it part of your bucket list. So I'm going to go ahead and simulate what it might look like under a telescope. Under a telescope, with a very high power eyepiece, this is what Saturn may look like. You should definitely be able to see the rings. You may not be able to see some of the dimmer moons of Saturn, especially if you're under a suburban sky like myself, or a sky with just a lot of light pollution. Number 2. My next favorite object to view in the night sky is not too far away. This is still July 4th at 10 p.m. So after you view Jupiter and Saturn, all you gotta do is look towards the left, towards the eastern part of the sky, and you'll spot 3 of the brightest stars: Vega, Deneb, and Altair. And if you watched my June video, you may remember these 3 stars form what's known as a summer triangle. Now, the summer triangle serves as a celestial calendar, indicating the approach of, as you guessed it, summer. Number 3. My next favorite object to view in the night sky is the butterfly cluster. The butterfly cluster is an open star cluster. It is a deep sky object, so I highly recommend seeing this with a telescope. You can still spot it with a pair of binoculars, but you definitely won't get the detail a telescope can bring you, especially when it comes to differentiating the different stars in the cluster. The brightest stars in this cluster resemble a butterfly, as you can see, and that's why it's called the butterfly cluster. See, astronomers are not very creative when it comes to naming things. We just call it like we see it. Can you see a butterfly amongst the brightest stars in its cluster? I think I can. I think that bright orange star on the left there resembles the tip of a butterfly's antenna. That's what I see, at least. Now, how do you find the butterfly star cluster? Let's go ahead and fast forward to Saturday, July 18. It's about the middle of the month. There will be no moon, so the skies will be pretty dark. Look towards the southeast, southern end of the sky. If you're fortunate enough to live under very dark skies, and lucky you, you may still be able to spot the band of the Milky Way. And the band will appear to be pretty thick closer to the horizon, and that's because you're actually looking towards the center of our Milky Way galaxy. The butterfly cluster, from our point of view, is located towards the center of the galaxy, so it'll be right around here. Since I live in the DC area, I am not fortunate enough to have very dark skies, so let's make this a little bit more realistic for me, and for many of you, a nice light polluted suburban sky, because, you know, we love a challenge. So look towards the southeast and find the planets Jupiter and Saturn. Luckily for us, these planets will still be in their nice diagonal line, so they'll be easily recognizable in the sky. So find Jupiter, and then towards the right of the planet, find these 4 stars. Imagine drawing a line between these stars. You'll eventually draw a trapezoid. Now these 4 stars can be pretty dim, so you may have to squint a little bit in order to see them, depending on the amount of light pollution and where you are. But once you do, you should be able to easily recognize this shape. These 4 stars are actually part of the constellation Sagittarius. Alright, so once you spot these 4 stars, take out your telescope and center your eyepiece on this star here. I recommend getting the largest eyepiece you have with the widest field of view. That way you can easily search for objects when you start drifting your telescope in the night sky. So go ahead and center your eyepiece on this star. It'll look something like this. So once you have the star centered, go ahead and drift the telescope towards the right. And you're moving towards the center of the Milky Way in the southern end of the sky. Eventually, voila, you've found the butterfly star cluster. Congratulations, you found a butterfly in the sky. Number 4. My next favorite object to view in the night sky in July is the Great Sagittarius star cluster. Now, what is the difference between this star cluster and the butterfly cluster that we discussed previously? Well, the butterfly cluster is an open cluster, meaning that the stars are a little more spread out in the sky. And that cluster contains about 80 stars. This cluster, the Great Sagittarius star cluster, is a globular cluster. And that means that the stars are bound together by gravity in a small region of space. And this cluster contains about 70,000 stars. Finding the Great Sagittarius star cluster is relatively easy. Since the star cluster is 10,400 light years away, it's pretty dim. So I recommend no moon in the night sky and observe it under dark skies. This is still July 18, around 10 p.m. So in order to find the star cluster, go ahead and find Jupiter once again in the southeast, and find this familiar pattern of stars, this trapezoid formation that's part of the constellation Sagittarius. You can spot the great Sagittarius cluster with a pair of binoculars, but all you're going to see is a patchy bluish ball in the sky. Since the star cluster is far away, I recommend getting a telescope for this. In order to search for this star cluster, again, use the largest, widest eyepiece possible. Go ahead and center your eyepiece and this star here again. Once you do, it'll look something like this. Now instead of drifting your telescope towards the right, like how we did with the butterfly star cluster, you'll instead move your telescope up. So once you do, you'll run into, voila, the great Sagittarius star cluster. Now underneath the telescope, this cluster is going to appear pretty fuzzy, like a fuzzy bluish ball. But once your eyes get adjusted to the night sky, you'll begin to see individual blue dots. And these individual dots are actually stars. And just imagine there's actually 70,000 stars packed into that little bluish fuzzy ball in your eyepiece. I think that's pretty crazy. Number 5. For this, we're going to switch to my trusty phone planetarium app, Sky Safari Plus. The final object I'm looking forward to seeing in July is the Delta Aquariid meteor shower. Now this meteor shower will take place between mid-July and mid-August. It will appear to originate in the southeastern part of the sky around the constellation Aquarius, hence the name, Delta Aquariid. The peak for this meteor shower is July 28 to 29. However, there will be a bright moon during those evenings, so that will wash out many of these faint meteors. If you really do want to see this meteor shower, I would check it out the weekend before on July 25 to 26 because there will be no moon during those evenings, specifically around midnight on early morning of Sunday, July 26. So sit back, stare at the night sky. There'll be 15 to 20 meteors per hour, so if you're lucky enough to see one, you need to make a wish. So that concludes my 5 favorite things to view this month, July 2020. If you have other objects you'd like to suggest, feel free to comment below. Also, let me know whether or not you found this guide to be helpful. And if you do find it to be helpful, I suggest liking and subscribing to my channel. Now go out there and enjoy what the night sky has to offer, but with proper social distancing, of course. Be well, be safe, stay curious, and until the next episode, peace.